All right, here we're going to start our new kind of notebook style and how we're really going to be taking notes this semester. So we're really going to start here in section 6.1. Here's a list of the materials that you're going to need today to kind of fill out your notebook and complete this part of your learning. So I want you to go ahead and pause this video while you go ahead and get all of these things. So first you're going to need your math notebook. We're going to start fresh with a brand new clean one. You will need 2 half sheets of copy paper, folded hot dog style. Then you're going to need some scissors, a glue stick, some colors, and a highlighter. For me, my colors, I use colored pens and colored markers, both of them, so you'll see that throughout these lessons and throughout making our notebooks. So either way, you do want to add color though, because it does help us when we're recalling things and when we're going back to tests and review. Your brain actually does remember different colors. So let's go ahead and start here. So here is my notebook. I'm going to use this brand new blue one. See, we're starting at the very beginning. So for Algebra 1B, here's this new one I'm going to use. Okay, so on this very first page of your notebook, this is where you're going to kind of customize it. Say, this is my awesome math learning. Right here, math equals awesome. And then some smiley faces. So on this page, I want you to go ahead and customize it. Definitely somewhere on here put what this is for. This is for Algebra 1B, so second semester of Algebra 1, just so you know exactly what you're looking at. And then customize this. Draw some pictures. Spend a little bit of time doodling. Okay? Because that's what makes it actually yours and makes it kind of fun and something you'll actually look back at. So then we're going to really look at section 6.1. So we're going to turn the page and start fresh. So in your notebook, up at the very top, you're going to write down our section. Right? We're looking at 6.1, and we're looking right here at properties of exponents. So make sure that this is also at the top of your page. So your notebook should look really a whole lot like the one I'm doing right now. Okay? We always want to start our day and our lesson with our learning targets. So our first learning target was to use 0 and negative exponents. So we're going to look at what these 0 and negative exponents do and how we can use them. The second learning target is we're going to use properties of exponents. And our third learning target was we're going to solve real-life problems involving exponents. Okay, you'll see that I start to abbreviate a lot of my writing, so especially here, probs instead of problems. The more you can start to simplify your writing and so that you understand what you're talking about, the better off you're going to be. Okay, so now we have our 3 really big learning targets, so now we have to actually start. So you're going to need one of those half sheets of paper. That's hot dog style, so you'll see it's kind of tall and skinny, and then you're going to fold it in half. Okay. And we're not actually going to use this whole thing. Yeah, maybe we are. Okay. So fold it in half. And I folded it the top down towards me. So now I'm going to actually do about 1/2 inch of a fold where I've already folded and just kind of fold it down. Okay, and make a crease. And then you can see that that folds back up. This is going to be kind of where we glue. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get my glue stick out. And again, right, here's my paper. I folded it in half towards me, and then I fold it down about 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch. It's not an exact thing. And then I glue that little flap that I just folded, and it can go right there on your notebook. Now you need your scissors. So on both of these, right, all the way up, we're going to cut it about in half. You want to get fairly close. It's not necessary to like actually measure it. You just want to be fairly close. So you'll see you've got a couple of different folds and a different flap there, right? So now on this first one, we want to look back at that first learning target was 0 and negative exponents. So now let's talk about this. Here's our 0 exponents. If you want to write yours going straight down, you certainly can. This is where you can kind of take this notebook and make it yours. I tend to like to write things sideways for some reason. So we looked at our 0 exponent right there, and now we also are going to explore some negative exponents. So that's going to go right here on this side. So now we're going to see what actually happens. So I'm going to take just this top layer and flip it up. So then up at the very top, we're going to look at what this looks like for numbers. Like what does the math look like here? So I'm going to write numbers. So remember on this left side was our 0 exponent. So my first example, right, 4 to the 0 equals 1. That's a number, right? Well, does it have to be 4? No, it really could be anything. And when we denote anything, we're going to use that letter A. So A to the 0 equals 1. But one thing I have to note and make sure of that A cannot equal 0. So this is kind of what the numbers look like. Okay, so what does that actually mean? That's where we're going to flip this part up and talk about what it actually means in like words. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and use my just regular pen and say what it really means. So what that tells me that I know that any number that is not 0 raised to the power of 0 is 1. So I know that any number to the 0 is 1. So this piece of your notebook right here that we're doing right now, this is where you take those core concepts that are in your book and kind of turn it into your own words, right? So I took this that I have both a 4 and I also have a letter taken to the 0 equals 1. So really what that tells me is that anything that is raised to the power of 0 is 1. Okay, so there's my 0 exponents. So now let's look at our negative exponents. Okay, so here's kind of our example. I've got 4 to the negative 2 equals 1 over 4 squared. Well, again, I don't want just numbers, right? Because it's not just 4. So here's what I know. I know that A, which can be any number, right? That's not 0, to the negative n is just another way to denote a number, is 1 over a to the n. And again, my A cannot equal 0 here. Okay, so now let's come up with some words of what these examples mean. So in reality, this tells me that if I have a negative exponent, I'm going to move it to the other side of the fraction. And we're going to look here in just a minute of, if it's a negative exponent in the denominator, it can move to the numerator to become positive as well. Okay, so let's flip and actually write our words of what this means. So what this really means is if I have a negative exponent, right? And again, I'm going to abbreviate, but these are my abbreviations. You can come up with your own. It becomes positive by switching its place in the fraction. Okay, so now you see here on this flip book, I've got information about my 0 exponents and my negative exponents. I've got just some basic what do they look like, and now I've taken it and put it in my own words of what is it actually doing and how am I going to go from there. Okay, so there's that flip part. So now let's scooch our paper up a little bit and look at an example. Okay, so here's my examples, and sometimes we'll have examples and sometimes we won't. So here's my example here. So I have 6.7 to the 0 equals 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remind myself using a different color that anything to the power of 0 is 1. Okay, so since this is something, right, it's a non-zero, it doesn't matter that it's a decimal. It could be a fraction, it could be anything to the 0, it equals 1. Great. So now let's look at our second piece, right? So that deals with our 0 exponents. So now let's look at something for our negative exponents. What if I have something kind of big like this? What if I have 4x to the 0 over y to the negative 3? How would I deal with that? Right, so here's another example that we're going to look at. And you'll see that this example combines both of these pieces because I see I have a 0 exponent and I also have a negative exponent. So the first thing is we want to deal with that 0 exponent. So this becomes, the 4 stays alone because nothing has happened. Right, this x to the 0 becomes 1. And I'm going to give myself a little arrow here because 0 exponent. And I'm just going to write 0 exponent because now I remember from up here that anything, right, we see that any number that is not 0 that's raised is 1. So here I can just say that, oh, that's my 0 exponent. But then I still have y to the negative 3. So we're not quite done yet, right, because I still have that negative exponent. So then I know I can equal. I'm going to simplify my top part, my numerator, which becomes 4. To get rid of this negative exponent, I move it to the numerator. I switch its places in the fraction. So here, I'm going to give myself a little arrow and I say negative exponents. Because I know that to get rid of that negative to make it a positive exponent, I change its place in the fraction. Since it was in the denominator, it now comes into the numerator. Awesome, so let's look back at our learning targets. Great, we just did this one, using 0 and negative exponents. So now we have to go through and look through the properties of exponents. So we're going to flip our page, and you're going to need that other half sheet of copy paper that we had right here. We're not going to use this whole sheet either, so we're going to cut a little bit off of it. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be making 5 little flaps, okay? So, and you'll notice that this doesn't actually fit in your notebook this way. So what I do is up here we're going to be dealing with the properties of exponents. Okay, so I leave this up here so I know exactly what I'm looking for when I'm flipping through my notebook. Then your paper is going to go right below that, and you'll see down here at the bottom there's a couple of inches that I can go ahead and cut off that I'm not going to actually use. And again, this is not an exact science. We're just going to get it so it's usable and so that it makes sense. Okay, so now here we go. This actually fits on my paper. So now on this left side, I'm going to fold over, again, about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Just a little piece that I can go ahead and glue. That's going to be the part that I glue again. So now again, you need your glue stick. And we're going to glue that little flap right over there to the left side of your paper. So now that that's glued in there, we're going to cut this into 5 different sections. So they don't have to be exactly the same size, but you want them to be fairly close, right? So just take a mental picture of kind of where 5 would be. So that means you're making 4 cuts. So we're going to cut about there and about there. And the more we get into this semester, the prettier our notes will look, just because we're going to get really good at doing these. Okay, so now you see I have my 5 different flaps. Okay, so here you're really going to need your pen or your writing utensil. I like pen personally, and your highlighter. Those are going to be our biggest things right now. So the first property of exponents that we're going to look at is the product of powers. So I want you to think for just a second, what does product mean? And powers. We're dealing with a bunch of different exponents, okay? So the product of powers, when I know product means multiply. So here's what the product of powers tells me. When I multiply the same base, and we'll talk about base in just a second, what do? We add the exponents. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and highlight my add the exponents because that's the important part of what we're really going to be looking at. All right, so let's look at an example. So here I see I've got 4 to the 6th times 4 to the 3rd. So the 4 in this example would be our base. That's the number at the bottom, the big one. Our exponents here would be 6 and 3. And remember that an exponent tells me how many times I multiply by itself. Okay? So here, based on my product of powers property, I see I have the same base, so I know I add my exponents. So it becomes 4 to the 6th plus 3, which equals 4 to the 9th. And then we could actually sit down with our calculator and go for that. But that's the biggest property, is if my base is the same and I'm multiplying them, right? And we always use a dot or a star for multiplication, then I add my exponents. Okay, so my second property is going to be my quotient of powers. Okay, so quotient, remember, means divide. Okay, so what does that look like? So that means when I have the same base and I divide, so when I divide, same base. Well, let's think about this. So up here, if I multiplied the same base, I added my exponents. Now when I divide, I'm going to subtract my exponents. Okay, and again, make it clear and easy for you to see what we're looking at. So for this example, if I have 4 to the 6th divided by 4 to the 3rd, you see that the base is the same. They're both 4. I'm going to take that and I have 4 to the 6 minus 3 equals 4 to the 3rd. So when I'm dividing the same base, I subtract my exponents. Awesome. So our third property is the power of powers. So what this property tells me is when I take a power to another power, and again, here's my big thing, I multiply the exponents. Okay? So again, highlight, make it really clear and easy to find when I'm flipping through my notes. So here's our example. I have 4 to the 6th, but then I'm taking that power to the 3rd. So here's where you'll see that double exponent. So here's where I know I will multiply my exponents. So 4 to the 6 times 3 equals 4 to the 18th. Okay, so you'll see we have 2 more properties that we're learning about here. So here we're going to look at power of a product. Okay, and you'll see that it's kind of similar to our first one, but product of powers. This tells me I've got the product, so I'm multiplying 2 things with powers together. Here I'm saying, oh, I'm taking the power of something that's already multiplied together. That's how we can kind of look at these. So what this is telling me is when I multiply inside a parentheses, and again, I abbreviate, here's the only place where I can actually distribute my exponent. Okay? We can only do that when I'm multiplying inside my parentheses. So for example, I have 3 times 2 to the 5th. So if these are things that I can multiply, I can, but sometimes they won't be. So this also tells me that I can distribute that exponent, which means I now have 3 to the 5th times 2 to the 5th. Okay? So that's my power of a product. And our final property that we're going to look at is power of a quotient. Just like this one above, when I was multiplying, here I'm going to be dividing. Okay? So when dividing inside the exponent, inside the parentheses, I again can distribute my exponent. So one thing I really want you to keep in mind with these exponents and dealing with these parentheses is we've only looked at when I multiply and when I divide. You cannot do anything when I'm adding inside these parentheses. Okay, keep that in mind as we keep going through. So here's our example. If I have 3 over 2 inside my parentheses to the 5th, I see that I'm dividing, so I can end up with 3 to the 5th divided by 2 to the 5th. This is going to come in really handy when we start simplifying and really looking at these different things. So now what I want you to do is in this part of your notebook, right? I'm not going to do this for you. This is where I want you to go through and either come up with an example of each of these on your own, or you can use the example that's in the book. Either way is fine with me. Okay, so come up with your examples just to kind of show these. Okay, so these are the 2 main things that I wanted you to understand from this first section. Okay, you'll notice that we did not touch on that 3rd learning target of solving some real-life problems. That's really what you're going to be doing in your homework. So the other thing I want you to notice is that you do still have some paper here on the left sides of both of these pages. This would be a great place to write down those awesome problems that you're working on in your homework. Use this as some scratch paper, any of that. We'll go through and look at some of these later. But don't forget, so now what you really need to do is go through on this side, on our properties of exponents page, and come up with an example of each, right? And I like to do them right next to my tab. Let me show you what it looks like in my other notebook that I've done. So you'll see here on this page, right here are all of my different properties, same things that we just wrote inside, but then I have an example for each one. And I used the examples that are in the book, so that's fine too. So now once you've gone through and looked at those examples, now use this information, use our 2 foldables. Keep these with you while you're working on that homework, right? Because now we have all of the information that we need for this section. So go ahead and start working on that homework and let me know when you get stuck.